Well, hopefully we get a few more. Okay, welcome. How's everybody? Good. So this is our only meeting of this week. So we'll have one more lab next week. We'll do kind of another pre-post design looking at P&F stretching and jump performance. So you'll get to use the force plate. And we may get the vibration platform in there too. Haven't decided yet. We need one condition that's supposed to increase it and one condition that's supposed to decrease it. So we'll figure it out. And then next week will be finish chapter 10, start chapter 11. Week after that, finish chapter 11, review for the final, and the week following will be the final. So for today, went by fast. I'll have your exams corrected by the end of this week. So those will be posted by class next Monday. And for today, we'll get through about half of chapter 10. So do you have any questions? Okay. All right. So we're progressing on down the lower extremity, so from proximal to distal, just like we did with the upper extremity. So you'll see some similarities that we saw with chapter 7 with the wrist and hand, with the ankle and foot, but obviously some key differences. So the ankle itself is a ginglymus joint formed by the articulation of 3 bones, so the tibia, fibula, and talus. And so it flexes and extends, and we know that flexion of the ankle is called dorsiflexion. Extension of the ankle is called plantar flexion. So you can see the bones from a posterior view here. So movements of the foot, such as inversion, which we compare with supination at the hand, and eversion, which we compare with pronation, happens at joints that are lower than the true ankle joint. So turning the sole of your foot in, turning the sole of your foot out, takes place at joints that are below this true ankle joint. So down here where we have the subtalar, and then to the front, the transverse tarsal joints. So we'll talk about that. So the ankle and foot, there are 26 bones, so one less than what we had with each hand. So if you count the bones in the hands and feet, you're up to 106 bones right there. So we have 126 in the appendicular and then 80 in the axial. So far more bones in the appendicular due to the hands and feet. Hey Sam, come on in. So 19 large muscles. So these would be extrinsic muscles like we had with the wrist and hand. We also have several that are intrinsic. So when we say intrinsic, that means the origin and insertion all within the hand, within the foot in this case, kind of like what we had with the hand. Hey, welcome Tyler. Have a seat. And then we have lots of ligaments. So I'll ask you to memorize just a few of those. Most of the common ones that we get with sprains, high ankle sprain and inversion sprain and so on. I'll ask you to learn those. So the position of the foot is really important for load bearing as we have different positions during our gait. The gait can be classified into 2 parts. So there's the stance phase and the swing phase. So every time you take a step while walking, you'll go through a load bearing phase where the foot is in contact with the ground. That's the stance. And then you go through another phase where the foot is off the ground. That's the swing phase. so coming forward to contact the ground again. So the heel strike happens when the foot is slightly in supination. So supination and inversion of the foot, you can consider those being the same thing. So slight amount of supination is as the heel contacts the ground when we walk. As the foot rolls into the mid stance, the foot changes its position to be slightly pronated. So we go from supination into a little bit of pronation, and then as we go through the mid stance into the toe off, so the toe off or the push off phase, the foot goes back into slight supination. So we go from supination to pronation to supination as we push from the ground. So after the push from the ground is we have the swing phase. So the foot swings forward and prepares for another heel strike with ground contact. So your textbook has a really nice way of visually seeing what happens and the joint positions associated with each. I like that they also included the position of the knee joint. So you'll notice that when the knee is fully extended, the tibia has a relative amount of external rotation. And so that's during the initial heel strike where the foot is slightly in supination. And then as we roll forward into the mid stance, we can divide that into subphases where we have a loading response and a terminal stance. The tibia is rotating in the opposite direction, so the knee is in flexion. So remember, as the knee extends and flexes, there's a little bit of rotation there. So as the knee is in just a little more flexion, see how the knee is fully extended here as the heel strikes the ground, and then as we move into the load phase, the knee flexes just a little bit. So what happens is we get relative internal rotation of the tibia here. And then watch what happens, because during the toe off, you can imagine in your mind during the toe off as you're pushing from the ground, the knee extends again. So extension of the knee is the relative external rotation of the tibia. So as the knee flexes, we have internal rotation of the tibia with pronation of the foot. As the knee extends, we have external rotation with slight amount of supination. So basically, as you take a step, you go from supination to where your foot rolls in just a little bit to pronation, and then as you push from the ground, it goes back into supination. Then you have this whole swing phase where this leg is swinging forward and preparing to start the whole thing all over again. So, any questions on that? Yes?
Is there any variations, like between person to person?
Yes. So good, you're ahead. So, yeah, there's a lot of variation, which is why if you go to a really high-end shoe store to buy some running shoes, they'll often take video of your heel strike as you're running on a treadmill. If the foot remains in pronation past the mid stance while running, that's considered over pronation. So you're applying a lot of pressure here to the medial arch of the foot. So you can see here, this is over pronating, where the foot should be at this point going back towards supination, but staying in pronation past the mid stance. So there's a lot of interest in the connection between overpronation and risk for injury. So what I'd like you to do is, this is an article from Runner's World. I want you to just click on that link. It's a very short article. I just want you to read through it. There's no questions or anything to answer with it, but just scan through it quickly. So you should be able to click on it within the PowerPoint there. And it looks like this. So it was just written earlier this year. Take a couple minutes and read through that. It's amazing the technology that goes into these running shoes now. So with that article, what was the take-home message?
Find a shoe that you feel comfortable wearing.
Yeah, find a shoe you feel comfortable wearing. I suppose if there's an excessive amount of pronation, you could address it individually. But as far as injury risk, at least the research so far doesn't seem to support that connection, although that doesn't mean there's not a connection. So the conclusion from the study cited in that article, more work is needed to ascertain if highly pronated feet face a higher risk of injury than neutral feet. So it's just one issue when choosing a running shoe. A lot of people have their favorite brands based on foot width and the amount of drop between the heel and the toe. There's so many factors. Bryant, what's your brand of choice?
Recently the Brooks.
Brooks, okay, good. I've seen a lot of Brooks. Anybody else jog on a regular basis? What's your brand of shoes? Brooks?
There's like a certain one. It's like the GTS one.
The GTS Brooks, okay. Okay. I've heard it. That one's seems like a relatively new compared with a lot of the other companies, but that's a popular one. Okay. So lots to think about. Asics was popular. Do you see people wearing Asics anymore?
They become more popular.
Yeah. So okay. So you'll need to commit these to memory. Next week there will be a quiz on the bones of the foot, like we had with the the hand, and yes, you will have a word bank, but you need to know where each of those words go. So if we look at the right foot as an example here, we can see we have 7 tarsal bones. So 7 tarsals comparable with the 8 carpal bones of the hand. So the talus is on top here, and so that is the bone that articulates with the tibia and fibula to form the ankle joint. Underneath the talus we have the calcaneus, okay, so that's the heel bone. And then anterior to that, on the medial side, we have the navicular. Okay, so navicular means boat-shaped. So you can see it kind of has that curvature to it, like a boat. And then laterally, we have the cuboid, okay, that articulates with the calcaneus. And then back over to the medial side, we have the cuneiform bones. So these are easy to remember if you just remember your directional terminology. So medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiforms. So remember which bones are on the medial side, which ones are on the lateral. So 7 tarsals and then 5 metatarsals. So kind of like the metacarpals we had with the hand. So the great toe is number 1. So on the medial side, number 1, and then followed by the 4 lesser toes with 2, 3, 4, and 5. We see similar nomenclature for the muscles of the foot. So for the thumb, muscles that control the action of the thumb, what was the common name? Yeah, pollices. So for muscles that control the great toe, do you remember from Carl's class or other halluces? So not pollices, but halluces. Hallucis, halluces. So flexor halluces, extensor halluces. So these are muscles specifically for action at the great toe. So then, similar to what we had with the hand, we have the knuckle joints. So these were the metacarpophalangeal joints. For the foot, we have the metatarsophalangeal joints. So very similar to the hand in that the metatarsophalangeal joint of the thumb is ginglymus, just like the first metatarsophalangeal joint for the great toe is ginglymus. But do you remember what the other 4 digits, what the metacarpophalangeal joints of the 4 lesser digits were? So 2 planes, condyloid. So same thing with the 4 lesser toes, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th metatarsophalangeal joint, those are condyloid. So they can flex and extend, and then there's a slight amount of abduction and adduction that takes place at the metatarsophalangeal joint of the 4 lesser toes. So then, moving distally, the great toe has 1 interphalangeal joint. So a lot like the thumb. Okay, so it's ginglymus. And then we have a proximal and a distal interphalangeal joint for the 4 lesser toes. So those are also ginglymus, just like the joints of the fingers. Okay, so looking at the tibia and fibula, proximally, we have a tibial-fibular joint. We also have a distal tibial-fibular joint. So these are classified as slightly movable. So amphiarthrodial was the word for slightly movable. Notice that a lot like the ulna and the radius, there's this interosseous membrane. So interosseous means between bones. So interosseous membrane that stabilizes this articulation. So for the distal tibiofibular joint, there has to be a little bit of laxity. So a slight amount of movement, because as you're reaching maximal dorsiflexion, that joint has to open up just a little bit. So the fibula will actually pivot just a little bit as you dorsiflex and plantar flex. So there is a slight amount of movement there. Something else that we don't talk a whole lot about, we talk about the very prominent malleoli on the medial and the lateral side, but another less recognized malleolus would be on the posterior tibia. So we call that the posterior malleolus there, with just a little bit of thickening there near where the articulation is with the talus.
Is it not palpable?
I don't think so, because you'd have to go through the Achilles, and just you'd have a lot of tissue there before you'd get down to that. But of course, you can easily feel these two on the medial and lateral side. So the malleoli act as pulleys for tendons that invert and evert the foot. So we're getting into some good test question material here. So there's two muscles that evert that run directly behind the lateral malleolus. So you can see those listed here: peroneus brevis, peroneus longus. In some textbooks, rather than peroneus, you'll see fibularis. I like peroneus a lot better, but muscles on the lateral side that run behind the lateral malleolus. So their tendons would use the lateral malleolus like a pulley for mechanical advantage. And then on the medial side, you have the three muscles of the deep posterior compartment. So much like the thigh, the muscles of the lower leg are compartmentalized. So you have a deep and a superficial posterior compartment. The deep compartment is comprised of three muscles. So your textbook nicknames those the Tom, Dick, and Harry muscles. And so that would be the tibialis posterior, is the T there, flexor digitorum longus, and flexor hallucis longus. So tibialis posterior, it's different than the tibialis anterior, because these muscles would all serve a function in plantar flexing, because remember, they're behind the malleoli. But then specifically, the flexor digitorum longus would be a flexor of the interphalangeal joints of the toes. The flexor hallucis longus would be a flexor of the interphalangeal joint of the great toe. So there's a few specific functions, as well as everything contributing to plantar flexion. Okay, so time for our first activity. Now, the reason I ask you to do this is not to give you pleasant memories of kindergarten, but to help you memorize, because I'm going to ask you these insertion points on the next exam. So if you happen to bring colored pencils, please get those out. If you did not, raise your hand and I can supply you with some. That first. Is there anyone that needs some? Okay. You're going to have 10 different points to memorize.
A couple crayons work.
I think so. You want
Sure.
here, borrow some.
Okay.
So there you are. All right, there you go. Right. Everybody good? Okay.
Crayons, purple crayons.
All right. So you're going to make your own study sheet for this. So you'll want to use a different color for each of these insertion points. that corresponds to one or more muscles. So knowing the insertion point can give you a clue on what the function of a muscle is. Oh. Okay, so you can make your own key and just color however it's going to help you remember best. So the very first insertion point is the tuberosity styloid process of the fifth metatarsal. So you're going to look at this part of the diagram right here. This is the styloid process of the fifth metatarsal right here at the proximal portion of the fifth metatarsal. And so that provides an insertion point for the peroneus brevis and peroneus tertius. So you could pick a color for that one, just put a dot right there, and then maybe make a key over here that you write in that same color, peroneus brevis, peroneus tertius, and wherever you want to put the key to your colors. So just take your time. So if you have tendons that are pulling on that point, the sole of the foot's going to turn out into eversion. It's okay. Okay. Need more pencils? Okay. All right, so everybody.
You said peroneus brevis and,
Mm-hmm.
oh.
We're just coloring the styling process.
Yes, so you're just making a study sheet, basically, is what you're doing. For insertion points for these muscles. Okay, you ready for, still need a minute? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so the tibialis anterior inserts on the inner surface of the medial cuneiform and the base of the first metatarsal. So inner surface, medial cuneiform, so that's going to be right here, and base of the first metatarsal. So right around this area, base of the first metatarsal, the inside of the medial cuneiform, which is this right here. So that's the tibialis anterior. Okay, so I'll give you just a second to finish that one. The next two, you're going to look at the undersurface of the right foot. So for the second and third bullet points, you're going to go to the undersurface, which is this part right here. So over on this side is where you're going to color the second and the third bullet points. So the peroneus longus inserts on the undersurface, okay, so that's why you're looking on the bottom of the foot, of the medial cuneiform and first metatarsal. Okay, so let's take a look at where that's at. So peroneus longus is going to be the undersurface of the medial cuneiform and base of the first metatarsal. So you're looking right around this area for the peroneus longus.
lateral side of the medial side?
So what it does is the peroneus longus tendon comes from the lateral side, which is where my finger's at. It crosses underneath the foot to the medial side and has its insertion right here. So the tendon actually crosses from the lateral to the medial side. And so when it pulls, it's still going to turn the foot out. So undersurface of the medial cuneiform and first metatarsal. So that's this area right in here. Right here. Okay, so tibialis posterior insertions on the undersurface of the navicular, cuneiforms, and second through fourth metatarsal bases. Okay, so let me read that again. So tibialis posterior, undersurface of the navicular, cuneiforms, and second through fourth metatarsal bases. Okay, so that's going to be right here. Okay, so it's going to be the navicular, which is right here. The cuneiforms, there's the medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiforms, and the bases of the, which metatarsal bases? Second, third, and fourth. So the navicular, or the sensitive, navicular, and then cuneiforms, and bases of the second, third, and fourth metatarsal. So that muscle comes up here on the medial side. Remember, it passes behind that medial malleolus. So it's going to have its insertions here. Navicular, cuneiforms, second, third, and fourth metatarsal bases. And if you have the PowerPoint pulled up, you can kind of go back and forth with where you're at.
Does it kind of cover all of the
Mm-hmm.
forms? Okay.
Yeah, so it's got kind of a broad tendon that connects at all those points.
And which ones are they?
That is the tibialis posterior. Okay, so we're up to 4 insertion points now. So probably should have a different color for each one. Okay, does everybody feel like they're ready to go to the next one? Okay, so number 5, right here. Okay, so extensor digitorum longus. So by the name, you know it's going to be an extensor of the 4 lesser toes. Okay, so the extensors are going to be on top. Kind of like how all of your finger extensors are on this side of your forearm. All the toe extensors are going to be right on top. So we're going to look at the top of the foot, top of the 2nd through 5th distal phalange bases. So if we go forward, that's going to be right here on top, right here at the distal phalange bases. So that distal segment is going to be right on the base of the 5th, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd. So extensor digitorum longus. The bases of the distal phalanx of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Yep, extensor digitorum longus. So on top of the foot again, 2nd through 5th distal phalange bases. So then the next one, extensor hallucis. So that's gonna be extensor of the great toe, so that's gonna be the top of the first distal phalange base. Extensor hallucis longus. So that's going to be right here at the base of that distal phalanx. Extensor hallucis longus. Base of that first distal phalanx. Extensor hallucis longus, and then extensor digitorum longus would be the bases of the 4 lesser toes.
HALLUCIS?
You go back. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. So that's number 6.
Are we gonna have to do the origins too, or just the insertion?
Just the insertion points. Yeah.
What's the top of the base?
This would be just the base of that segment.
The base, the top of the interphalangeal joint,
And just be just past that interphalangeal joint, just right there on the distal, or on the proximal part of that segment. So you have this distal segment, and it'd be right there on the base. Okay, so then the next one, really simple. So you've got flexor of the toes, extensor of the toes. So this would be a flexor digitorum longus. So now you're back on the undersurface of the foot. So the right part of your diagram. And it would be the 2nd through 5th distal phalange bases. So right here on the undersurface of the right foot, the distal phalange bases for the 5th, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd toes right along here. Flexor digitorum longus. So that's number 7, so we just have 3 to go. Oh, that looks nice. Okay, good. Going slowly. Okay, so number 8 is the flexor hallucis longus. So that's going to be on the bottom again, so on the right part of your diagram, that's going to be the undersurface of the first distal phalange base. So you're looking at the undersurface, which is this part right here for the right foot. This is the top of the right foot, bottom of the right foot. The flexor hallucis longus is going to be the base of the first distal phalanx right in here. So the great toe has its own muscles that flex and extend. Okay, so we're up to the very last one, and it has 2 muscles that have a common insertion. So the posterior surface of that calcaneal tuberosity is right here, tuberosity of calcaneus. You're gonna just make a mark right here, tuberosity of calcaneus. So that serves as a common insertion for the gastrocnemius and soleus via the Achilles tendon.
On the top and under the foot? Or just
The top would make the most sense because that's where you can best see that attachment point. So right here would be where the Achilles tendon attaches for the gastrocnemius and soleus, right? There on the top would be where you can see it.
Will you go back to the other slide?
Sure.
Thank you.
This one? Or, there we go.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So you've got, it should help you with memorizing insertion points for the extrinsic muscles. These are the ones that have their origins outside the foot and then attach within the foot.
These are all extrinsic.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so the attachment point can kind of give you a good idea of what the muscle does as well in terms of its action. Okay, so are we okay to keep going? Okay. Okay, so the proximal distal tibiofibular joints are amphiarthrodial, so there's a little bit of movement there. There's an interosseous membrane that provides stability. The distal joint, the distal tibiofibular joint is where we oftentimes have what's called a high ankle sprain. So if you've ever heard of a high ankle sprain, it's this distal tibiofibular joint that the ligaments involved with that. So it's specifically the anterior tibiofibular ligament. So we can see that the anterior tibiofibular ligament is right here. So ligaments are typically named according to the bones that they connect. So the tibiofibular ligament connects the tibia and fibula. So this is the anterior part, this is the posterior part. In cases of more severe high ankle sprains, we can also sprain the posterior tibiofibular ligament as well as the interosseous membrane can tear as well. So the ankle joint itself, the talocurl joint, is a hinge or ginglymus type joint. It has variable range of motion, so 50 degrees of plantar flexion, 15 to 20 degrees of dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion is oftentimes the limiting factor. Plantar flexion is typically not a problem, especially we kind of live in a culture where people wear shoes that have a little more of a heel. Which, if you're wearing shoes that have a heel, what position is your foot in? It's in plantar flexion, so the foot adapts. And so if you're always in plantar flexion, your ability to dorsiflex is going to be limited. So your natural ability to dorsiflex is going to change and be much less. So if you've studied how to squat really well, the range of motion at the ankle joint is really, really important in being able to reach a good depth with squatting. So it's not necessarily an issue with tightness in the Achilles tendon or tightness in the hamstrings, so much as just range of motion in dorsiflexion. So some people, if you put little 5-pound or 10-pound plates underneath their heels, they're able to reach a better depth in squat. And that's because you're giving them an artificial amount of dorsiflexion. So you're kind of assisting with that dorsiflexion. So I want to play just a real practical video on how to improve your dorsiflexion ability. So these are things that you can do and consider on a daily basis, which will help improve your squat technique. So I'll just play this. This is a nice practical video, someone that gives a lot of good content.
Step protocol to improve your ankle mobility. Here's the deal, guys. The more your knees can travel forward over your toes, the deeper you can get into a squat with a more upright chest. This is your level of ankle mobility. Now, I want to show you guys today, first off, how to test for your level of ankle mobility, and then we'll talk about how to fix it. Now,